No, come on, man.
I don't like him. I don't like that offense.
Oh, 100%.
I like Kirk Cousins. I'll fight everyone on this.
He's one of these guys that I'm a big believer in.
Who would we have ranked higher right now?
Are you serious? You don't actually believe that. Hey everyone, welcome into the FantasyPros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Sylvester, joined as always by Mike Tagliere. Tags, what's going on today, buddy?
Oh, nothing much. Another beautiful day talking some football. Getting into some draft talk. So it's kind of like we're getting closer and closer. I mean, I think the next time we record a podcast, it might not be July yet, but we're getting closer, guys.
We are 6 weeks away from the first preseason game, man. I'm so pumped about it.
I hope everything goes as planned. That's all I'm hoping for. Is like everybody asks, like, oh, what do you think about the NFL season? I'm like, I don't care what happens as long as they play. I just want to see them play football.
Hey, by the way, Tags and I are on Twitter at BobbyFantasyPro and at Mike Tagliere NFL. And here's what we've got planned for today's show, okay? We're going to be giving first-round draft advice. We're going to be going through all, 14 or 15 players who could be drafted in the first round. Then at the end of the show, we're going to go with 10 late-round must-haves. We've got a great guest. He's one of the most accurate in the industry every single year. It's Pat Fitzmaurice, editor, ranker at thefootballgirl.com. He's on Twitter at Fitz_FF. Pat, thanks for coming to the show. How are you doing?
Bobby and Tags, thanks for having me. Always good to be on with you guys, and I'm doing pretty well, man. Summer's here. It's nice to be able to get outside and chase the white ball around a little bit. And, unfortunately, I'm always chasing it into trees and bunkers. But, man, I'm with you, Tags, and keeping my fingers crossed that things go off without a hitch this fall, and it is exciting to talk draft. And I got to ask you guys, do you know what spot you're going to be drafting at in the Scott Fish Bowl yet?
I'm drafting at 101.
Oh, Tags, did you kick Scott Fish a bribe for that spot?
I did not. And I'm like torn. I hate being on the turn, like going back and forth, because then like you don't get to see the trends as they're happening. You kind of have to just reach for players on the turn. But I guess in a tournament like this, it's kind of okay to have that.
Yeah, I don't remember where I'm picking, either 5th or 7th. Regardless, I'm going Joe Mixon. So
nice, man. I kind of like
Where'd
that
you end
call.
up, Pat?
I'm at 109. I don't mind that.
So you might get Joe Mixon too.
I possibly could there.
Yeah.
And the tight end premium, I think Travis Kelce is a possibility. I just got to wrap my head around the scoring system for quarterbacks and figure out how highly to value them in a Superflex league. But it's going to be fun, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, by the way, I have 7th, not 5th. I would not take Mixon above Saquon, Kamara, Elliott, McCaffrey, or Thomas, as we'll get into here in a second.
Yeah.
I've got 7th, and I'm planning on taking Joe Mixon. We'll see if they let me do that. Hey, by the way, guys, we've got some giveaways going on right now. We're giving away a Fielder's Choice wallet. It's made from vintage baseball glove leather. You guys are going to love this. And we're also giving away a signed DeAndre Hopkins Cardinals helmet. The first one ends, the Fielder's Choice wallet, ends on Tuesday night, June 30th. So make sure to get your entries in. The signed DeAndre Hopkins one ends on July 15th. Regardless, details are the same for both contests if you want to enter. All you have to do, leave a review on either Apple Podcast or Stitcher. Then send us a screenshot of that review at contest@fantasypros.com. And if listeners want to check out the details, you can go to fantasypros.com/contest. All right, guys, let's get into it. First round, obviously Christian McCaffrey is the number 1 overall pick. If you're even considering anyone else besides McCaffrey, you're thinking way too hard. Don't get cute. Take McCaffrey. Standard, half PPR, full PPR. It doesn't matter. You're taking McCaffrey. But in Superflex, Pat, would you take Lamar Jackson over McCaffrey?
I would not. I would stick with McCaffrey. It's tempting. I mean, the turbocharged numbers you can get from Lamar Jackson. And Rich Rebar made a really good point on my podcast earlier this offseason where he was talking about how Lamar had just this fantastic year, even though things basically went totally according to plan for the Ravens. And then in the playoffs, we saw the Ravens fall behind to the Titans. And all of a sudden, Lamar is in a negative game script and he's throwing a lot, he's scrambling, and he puts up just this crazy, I think 40-point fantasy day. Just, what if things don't go so perfectly for the Ravens? And, Lamar has 4 or 5 of these games where he has that kind of point total, and pretty much no matter who your opponent has, you're winning that week's game because of Lamar. So, it's not crazy to consider him, I guess, at 101, but, I just don't think there's really any reason to worry about McCaffrey. The two new variables here are the new quarterback and the new offensive coordinator, but Teddy Bridgewater seems to be a pretty conservative decision maker, and I'd have to imagine that he's going to enjoy having the option of dumping the ball off to McCaffrey and watching CMC do his thing. And then it's pretty hard not to be enthusiastic about McCaffrey's potential in a Joe Brady offense after seeing the sort of all-purpose usage that Clyde Edwards-Helaire got down in Baton Rouge last year.
That was an incredible offense down in Baton Rouge. LSU Tigers were phenomenal last season, putting up all those points. It's really interesting because typically in Superflex or 2 QB leagues, when you've got one of these elite quarterbacks, I would be comfortable taking them 101. And Lamar Jackson is the best fantasy quarterback we've seen in a long time, at least what he did last year. Because you can't rely on those inflated touchdown rates like Patrick Mahomes had. You can't expect him to really repeat that. And Lamar Jackson runs the ball so much. But for me, there's so much injury risk with Lamar Jackson compared to other quarterbacks. Whereas in Mahomes, you can be pretty confident he's going to play 14, 15, 16 games. I'm not so sure that's the case with Lamar Jackson. Now, Tex, first of all, can you explain what Superflex Leagues are? I remember 2-3 years ago, 5-10% of people were playing in them. Now it's 35%, man.
It's going up, definitely, and especially people that are paying attention to the podcast now, you might be dabbling in something like Superflex or 2 quarterback leagues. So 2 quarterback leagues obviously means you got to start 2 quarterbacks, and having 3 on your roster is almost paramount because you have you're starting 2 every week, and if you have a bye week with your quarterback, you need one to put in there. Superflex gives you a little bit more flexibility, and that's why I do believe that ultimately that's going to become the norm in fantasy football, where in your flex spot, you might have 2 flex spots, but one is a super flex where you can play a quarterback, you can play a running back, wide receiver, tight end.
And most people will always be playing a quarterback, right?
For sure.
You have the super flex because if you're playing in 12-team leagues and they're bye weeks, not everyone can roster 3 quarterbacks.
Correct. In 12-team leagues, 32 teams, obviously somebody's going to be left without 3 quarterbacks. So, but ideally you play a quarterback in that slot, and quarterbacks start going in the first round. Now, I definitely take McCaffrey at 101. Sure. If you want to consider Mahomes at 102, or Lamar Jackson at 102, I don't really have an issue with it if you want to do that. But just know that it's going to put you behind the 8 ball with running backs and wide receivers.
Pat, do you prefer Superflex leagues? Because here's the way I look at it. We've drafted 60, 70 running backs in standard fantasy football leagues, and the position hardly matters in real life. And then you've got these quarterbacks, the single most important position in all of sports. And we're drafting, 14 of them? That doesn't make any sense. They should be the most important player in my mind. So I like playing in Superflex leagues where they matter, and I like bumping passing touchdowns up to 6 and interceptions up to -4.
I agree with you, Bobby. I mean, Superflex is a great way to sort of restore the balance to fantasy that we're looking for with the importance of quarterback. I mean, it's the most position on the field in real football. It should be of greater importance in fantasy football. And, Superflex is a great way to do it. I play in a Superflex league with tags every year, the Chicago Media League that we're in with Andy Behrens and Michael Beller, Rob Wozniak, and some other guys. Yeah, and, Superflex definitely adds a layer of strategy, like how you're going to handle that position. As Tag said, getting a 3rd quarterback is really important. And there are times when you can still sort of fade the quarterback position a little and maybe wait to some degree. But if you wait too long, you can really get left out in the cold. So, you have to have a plan for attacking the quarterback position and instead of just waiting and saying, okay, I'm going to get one, after everyone else has taken their starter.
So, Tags, I think the really big question is if you've got pick number 2, I don't really see much of a difference between pick number 2 and pick number 5. I want to be in the top 4 or 5 this year. Who are you picking at number 2? Is there an obvious play for you?
If you're in full PPR, I'm going Alvin Kamara. Okay. Saquon Barkley, I don't have an issue with him, but my thought on Saquon, hear me out on this one, is that you don't want to draft him because you're going to be feeling bad after the first 3 weeks. I say that because he's playing against Pittsburgh, a team that was legitimately, they may have been the best run defense in football in terms of consistently not allowing RB1 performances. And then they go to at the Bears after that in Chicago. And I know the Bears weren't as good last year, but that was without Akeem Hicks up the middle of the field. That defense is still really freaking good, and especially in Chicago. And then playing San Francisco in week 3. So his start to the schedule is brutal. So if you wanted to trade for Saquon Barkley, say after those 3 weeks, you could probably get him at a slight discount. Again, you're still going to have to pay for him. But Alvin Kamara is someone that is in line for a lot of touchdown regression in the positive direction, towards the mean. So I do like Kamara an awful lot. He's heading into a free agent year. The Saints have no qualms about using him. Latavius Murray's there. He's another year older, but they didn't add anybody of significance to that running back crew outside of Ty Montgomery, and I'm not worried about him. Sure. You can make the case for Zeke there. You can make the case for Dalvin Cook, but I think there's worries about everybody. I talked about Barkley. Obviously at the start of his schedule is not great, but he's a guy that's locked into touches. That he's getting them. Kamara is a guy who's a little bit touchdown reliant because he's not going to garner, over 300 touches in the offense. You have Zeke, who's another year older. His efficiency came down a little bit last year. And then you have Dalvin Cook, who is threatening a holdout, and that defense is going through a lot of changes right now. You don't know if that Minnesota defense is going to be as dominant as it's been over the last couple of years. They may not run the ball nearly as much. Let's not pretend that Dalvin Cook was the picture of perfect health throughout the first 2 years of his career either. So there's a lot of risk with those guys, but it's just whatever. If you wanted to tell me you want to take Dalvin Cook number 2, I get it. I understand. So I'm with you, Bobby, in the fact
only
that
if he ends his holdout. I mean, if you're going into your draft and he's still holding out, you're not taking him at 2. You might not take him in the first round.
He's going to end it. Running backs have zero leverage. And if you guys haven't heard the new CBA that they agreed to, Dalvin Cook, if he does not show up to training camp, he cannot accrue a year towards his free agency. So basically he'd be in the same position next year with the Vikings. And if he doesn't show up, they cannot take away the fines. So players are fined for every day that they don't show up. And typically what happens is they don't show up for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then the team, they work out an agreement and they say, all right, we're going to remove those fines. Teams are no longer able to do that. It's not like, oh, well, we can make an exception. No, they're not allowed to do that. So Dalvin Cook has absolutely zero leverage here. He'd be losing money. He'd be losing a year towards free agency, and I just don't see that happening. So I'm guessing.
And plus, Alexander Madison and Mike Boone would get on the field, and they'd be like, hold on a second, do we need Dalvin Cook? Because you remember when Dalvin Cook went down and Jerick McKinnon and whoever the heck it was, they went like 11-1 in their last 12 games.
Yeah, I mean, running backs are a little bit overvalued in terms of how teams value them. But at the same time, that's what I'm saying, though. Like these 5 running backs, my question, Pat, is, we've talked about these 5 running backs now. We know we got CMC, and then the next tier of running backs, those 4. Would you consider Michael Thomas over any of them? And I mean in any format, too, because I think Michael Thomas is going to outscore some of these guys in a PPR format, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should draft him ahead of those guys, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So no, just because, there's no denying the greatness of Michael Thomas, okay? But if you're picking 4th or 3rd or somewhere in that top 5, your next pick is going to be like, 20, 21st, 22nd overall. And by then, the best available running backs left on the board, and I'm going off the FantasyPros ECR here rather than my own rankings, are going to be guys like Todd Gurley and Leonard Fournette, or maybe if you're lucky, Austin Eckler or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I even have some mild reservations about those guys too. So I think the 104-ish spot is maybe just a little earlier than I would be willing to take Thomas. Mm-hmm. I feel better about him at 106 or 107. Mm-hmm. And plus, I think you can probably agree with this, you guys, that last year, with Thomas finishing second in fantasy scoring only behind McCaffrey among non-quarterbacks, he did that on 185 targets, and that is 28 more than Julio Jones, who was the next closest receiver. Uh-huh. So almost 2 targets per game more than the number 2 guy, and it's the most targets we've seen by any wideout since 2015. And now the Saints have Manny Sanders, and it just seems like that outrageous target total for Thomas is bound to come down a little bit.
Right.
So, I'm sticking with running backs in that top half of the first round, or at least top 5.
Yeah. Earlier in the preseason, I had Thomas up at number 2 just because he's so much better than any other wide receiver, but I just can't do it with the state of running backs. I want one of these top dogs if I have a chance. So for me, it's Elliott and then Kamara and then Saquon Barkley. Now, if Dalvin Cook ends his holdout, I'll move him up right behind Barkley, and I'd put him at 5 and Thomas at 6. Pat, how do you have these guys ranked? Who's your number 2?
So for me, it's still Barkley, and Tags makes a fair point about the early schedule, although the one thing I would quibble with is the idea that you're going to trade for Saquon Barkley after 3 games with him going against these good defenses, because I think the Saquon owner is going to know what's up, and I don't think he's going to be selling low on him at that point. So, but Barkley is also the kind of guy who, even if he doesn't have smash games in those first 3 weeks.
He's got volume.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's still going to be.
And regardless of game script, he's going off.
Right. You know, a guy who's still got a pretty good chance at 100 yards from scrimmage in even in tough matchups and, 1 or 2 touchdowns over that span. So, plus, the overall numbers were down a little bit because of the high ankle sprain and the efficiency dipped a little right after he came back. But we saw him just go completely bonkers down the stretch. I think he averaged 180 yards from scrimmage over his last 3 games.
Yeah, hopefully he learned, don't come back from injury so early.
Right. Yeah, he did push it a little, and that was a little concerning. But, and I think we've got to be at least encouraged that Daniel Jones was decent last year, right? I mean, if he had been horrible, maybe we'd be a little more worried. Yeah, he showed us enough that we can believe that they're going to get at least adequate quarterback play.
Sure.
And then Zeke, I mean, in 4 seasons, he's averaged 96.5 rushing yards a game, 125 yards from scrimmage per game, and he scored 48 touchdowns in 56, I think, career regular season games. And he's playing in what should, again, be a really strong offense. So it's hard to take him out of that 3 spots. Tags makes a really good case for Kamara. I like him as a strong 4. I was kind of going back and forth between Kamara and Cook at 4 and 5, but I think with the, storm clouds of a possible holdout for Cook, even if he doesn't have leverage, as Tags correctly points out there, I've got Kamara 4, Cook 5, and, after that, that's where things get a little bit murkier, even if I do share your Joe Mixon enthusiasm, Bobby.
So it's really interesting because we're talking about all these guys, right? Barkley, Elliott, Kamara, Cook, Thomas. Nobody's mentioned Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry right now is number 5 in ECR. That's the expert consensus rankings. Number 6 in ADP. Just how we already know Tags is a little bit low on him. I'm a bit low on him. How low are you on him, Pat? Would you take Joe Mixon over him?
Oh, man. I'm so conflicted on this guy, Bobby. I mean, I was sure he was going to be a value trap in last year's drafts. He had the great finish.
Henry, you're talking about.
Oh, what did I say? I'm sorry.
No. I'm just making sure everybody understands that.
Yeah, so Henry has this great finish in 2018, but it basically been unplayable in fantasy for the first half of that season. And, he was TD dependent. He was barely used in the passing game. He was the kind of back who also seemed super susceptible to game script. Like if the Titans fell behind and Henry didn't get 20 or more carries, he was probably going to lay an egg that week. So then halfway through 2019, I felt like I had kind of been right. Like after 8 games.
Me too.
Yeah, Henry had like 581 rushing yards and 5 TDs. So yeah, he was on an 1,100 yard, 10 TD pace, but he was only averaging like 3.8 yards per carry. Only had 8 catches, so nothing in the passing game. And through the
then Ryan Tannehill happened, baby.
That's right. So he was the RB16 in a half-point PPR through the first 8 weeks. But then just goes berserk down the stretch again. Won leagues for a lot of people. So on one hand, guys, it's impossible not to tip your hat to Henry and acknowledge just how incredible he's been over the second half of the last 2 seasons. But then again, I mean, there are a lot of things that still kind of scare me here. The lack of usage in the passing game, the so-so start in 2019, the flat-out bad start in 2018, possibility of game scripts going against him some weeks, and most of all, this enormous workload he's handled. I mean, counting playoff games, the dude had 386 carries last year. That's just insane. I mean, let me ask you guys, how concerned are you about the possibility that Henry starts to wear down from this kind of usage?
We talked about this a little bit on last week's episode or earlier in this week. He's done it since high school. He did it in high school. He did it in college. He's 245, 250 pounds of pure machine. I mean, have you guys seen, this is going to really make me sound nerdy, Lord of the Rings. You know those guys who are just like enormous that the good guys are going up against? That's Derrick Henry. Every time I see that movie, I'm like, dude, they've got 5,000 Derrick Henrys on their team. That's unfair. I don't know if this man can be stopped, but regardless, I'm not relying on 18 touchdowns. I'm not drafting somebody 6th or 7th overall that I think has zero chance at being the RB1.
I don't think he has 0% chance. I don't think that's the case.
He would need 75% more PPR fantasy points last year than he did to beat Christian McCaffrey.
I know.
75% more.
McCaffrey
and Henry played as well as he possibly could.
Wasn't that the second best fantasy season of all time by Christian McCaffrey?
Sure. Okay, so cut McCaffrey down 25%, and you still need Henry to go way up from what he did
even
last
if you
year with 370
go back to McCaffrey
touches.
in 2018, and if you wanted to compare that, then Henry can do it. It's just McCaffrey's season is an outlier and everything. In terms of like expected fantasy output, my biggest concern is I mentioned it on 2 days ago on the podcast that Henry's opportunity in terms of where his opportunity is coming from, where on the field he's at when he gets it, the targets, where they come from, everything. Derrick Henry should have been the number 14 running back in terms of opportunity that he was given, which is 1.2 points behind David Montgomery. That just goes to show you just how much he outperformed expectations. And Derrick Henry is an above average running back, so he is going to outperform expectations, but 99 points. Christian McCaffrey was 71.7. The next closest was I think Aaron Jones at 67.5. So he's going to come down. It's just a matter of, are they going to give him more work in the passing game? He's clearly got enough work in the on the ground, but he is a first round pick in terms of like even going through my projections. I was kind of shocked at how high he came in the projections. But he is a first-round pick, but at the same time, you have to understand what you're getting with him, especially if you play in any sort of PPR format, where there might be ups and downs because he might only catch one pass in a week, and if he doesn't score a touchdown that particular week, it's going to kind of screw you in that RB1 slot. So I think it's a tier between, and most people are not going to put Kenyan Drake in it, but I'm going to put him in there. I'm going to say it's a tier.
Me too. Yes.
Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Kenyan Drake are all in the same tier for me. So if it's PPR, I think I would lean Drake. If it's half PPR, I might go with Henry.
Now, you said that, okay, Christian McCaffrey, that was an outlier. You look back at 2018, Saquon Barkley, 385 fantasy points. 2017, you've got Todd Gurley, 383 fantasy points. 2016, David Johnson, 407 fantasy points. Derrick Henry had 290 last year. Like, there's no chance he's improving 90 fantasy points unless he gets 450 touches and 20 touchdowns.
Yeah, he would have to. He needs more use in the passing game. There's no doubt about that.
Right. So, okay, this is really interesting that you're saying Kenyan Drake belongs in that tier. I've got him in that tier as well. And a lot of people, I mean, let's look down. Where is Kenyan Drake? Kenyan Drake right now, ECR 20, ADP 25. He's going in the third round, guys.
That's not going to stay happening. There's no way.
There's no way. He's going in the third round. So most people probably didn't think we'd bring him up. But I've got him in that tier as well. I've got them ranked in order. Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Kenyan Drake. Now, Pat, do you have Aaron Jones in your first round? And where do you have all four of these guys?
Thank you, Bobby. Yes, I do have Aaron Jones in my first round. So let's see. I've got, I don't think I ever answered your question about where I have Henry. I have him at number 7 overall.
Yeah.
Just one spot ahead of Mixon, but if it's full point PPR, I swing over to Mixon for sure. And even at half point PPR, this could cause me a real dilemma in the Scott Fishbowl. If I'm sitting there at 109 and both those guys are on the board, I might even go against my own rankings and take Mixon, depending on how
Henry's
I feel
not going to be
moment.
there. He's going off the board by the 5th pick, probably, in most leagues.
You would think.
It's crazy.
You would think. So then I actually have Miles Sanders at number 9. Ooh. And, as long as we don't see anyone go there, I just feel so good about his floor with the way he produced in the passing game last year. Even when he got off to a slow start as a runner, in the early part of his rookie year, he was still fantastic in the passing game, and the Eagles were using him on downfield routes. So I feel like the floor with Miles is really safe. I'm not worried about a committee with Doug Peterson. I think he knows that Sanders is really, really good, and he's going to let him eat in this offense. So, and then I do have Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb at the end of the first round. I know with Chubb there's a little bit of concern about the usage in the passing game, but he's such a good runner, and I love the additions the Browns have made to their offensive line. So, but back to Aaron Jones. Obviously those rushing numbers, those touchdown numbers are going to come down. And I know a lot of people are really frightened by the A.J. Dillon pick, that Dillon is going to steal goal line work. But I feel like even though Dillon is the better back, Jones is just a guy who's good inside the scoring zone, inside the 10, inside the 5. Like, he is slippery and, gets into the end zone. And I think they're going to have a hard time taking him off the field. I'm not worried about him being marginalized in this offense, or maybe he sees a little bit of workload slippage, but boy, he's so good. He's good in the passing game. Just such a shifty, elusive runner. It's just thoroughly a bet on the talent, and having him be kind of the centerpiece of what's still a pretty good offense. So I feel comfortable with him as a late round pick. Yes.
So Tags, this is interesting because I know you're not high on Nick Chubb. I know you're not high on Miles Sanders. I know you're not high on Aaron Jones. So why don't you just go ahead and blast both Pat and I for all three of these right now?
Well, hold on. I won't say I'm not high on them. I have them at 9, 10, and 11, so I'm right there.
Oh, you do? You have Jones in terms of running backs or overall?
In terms of running backs.
Okay.
So I'm not. I wouldn't take any of them in the first round. Aaron Jones. I mean, the dude is so undervalued in terms of a running back. I actually think that he might be a top 5 running back in the NFL. Like, I think he is that good, and I think the Packers, the top 2 positions on their team were quarterback and running back, and then they went out and traded up in the first for a quarterback, and then they drafted 2 fullbacks basically. So it's idiotic, and Aaron Jones, I can't wait to see where he lands next year because I really don't think it's going to be with the Packers, which is exciting for him. So in Dynasty, I've actually purchased him in a few leagues because a lot of people have moved him down with the additions that they've made in that backfield. I love Aaron Jones, the talent. I do believe he's the best receiver out of that backfield, and it's not even close. Aaron Rodgers does trust him in the passing game. I think in the end, he's going to finish he might be a top 6 running back, but he's going to be top 10. It's just getting there consistently is going to be the issue for him. That's why
it was frustrating last year. He finished as the RB2, and it was frustrating.
Yeah, it really was, and that's the coaching staff there. Nick Chubb, I really, and I brought this up before. Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor, someone please tell me the difference between these two right now, because they're both very, very, very talented running backs that don't get used a lot in the passing game. One of them plays behind the best offensive line in football and has lesser competition in Marlon Mack, while the other one plays behind an offensive line that is rebuilding, and they've added some pieces, but he's got Kareem Hunt to deal with. Nick Chubb is obviously going, borderline first round, where Jonathan Taylor is falling into sometimes the 4th round. So give me the discount on this. Reminds me last year of like Le'Veon Bell and Leonard Fournette. I'm like, I'll just wait till the 3rd or 4th round, take Fournette. I'm not taking Le'Veon Bell in the 1st.
Exactly.
So I love Nick Chubb, the player. Don't like the draft spot. And then Miles Sanders, he's been moving up my board. He has been.
Okay.
Oh, because they haven't added a running back. I this entire offseason, I've been waiting for them to add someone. Sure. And if they add no one, if it's just Miles Sanders and Boston Scott back there, I am all in.
He could be a league winner. Like if Doug Peterson changes his mind and doesn't do the committee thing this year, Miles Sanders could be the RB1 this year.
Yeah, and when you look
his
at
ADP's 22.
Yeah, and when you look at the wide receiver core they've put together, like Jalen Reagor, Deshaun Jackson, they traded for Marquise Goodwin. They snagged another speedster late in the draft. They're stretching the field in this offense. So if they're able to do that, it's going to clear things out for some of the running backs like Miles Sanders, who's extremely talented in his own right. So he keeps moving up my draft board. Yes, as of right now, I would rather have Miles Sanders than Josh Jacobs.
Interesting. I have Miles Sanders very, very, very low, because I don't believe that Doug Peterson is going to do the right thing. I do think they're going to sign somebody, so I just won't have any shares. That's fine. I totally get the appeal with him. There's a ton of upside. And if it continues and they're not signing anybody, and we get into the preseason, sure, I'll draft Miles Sanders late 1st round, early 2nd. Now, we haven't talked about any of these wide receivers. We'll get to them in a second, but first, I want to talk about Josh Jacobs. You already mentioned him, Tags. We brought up Nick Chubb. Are there any other running backs that you could feasibly see going in the 1st round that we haven't mentioned? Pat?
I don't think so.
No, I think that's probably it. I mean,
okay.
I have no quibbles with Kenyan Drake as a 1st rounder. I've got him 13th overall right now. I do have some concerns about the fact that he's never done it for a full year, that the Arizona offensive line still looks pretty bad. And then he's actually got 2 pretty good backs behind him in Chase Edmonds and Eno Benjamin, who, inexplicably was a 7th round pick this year, even though I thought he was a better prospect than A.J. Dillon. And, Tags already had basically my rants about the Packers draft, so I don't need to go any further on that.
Wait, you're a Packers fan, aren't you?
I am.
Living in Chicago.
Behind enemy lines, Bobby. That's right. So, yeah, it's kind of fun. But I used to have, when I was living in Wisconsin, I knew a lot of my good buddies were Bears fans. So, it's only fair that I should have to experience what they did. So, no, I think that's kind of the cutoff for me. Jacobs probably isn't a 1st round pick for a lot of people anymore, just because now with Jalen Reagor being re-upped and with Lynn Bowden being drafted, there's probably not much room for Jacobs' usage in the passing game to go up.
Yeah.
Even though I know that Mike Mayock has talked about like tapping into his pass catching potential, but the personnel moves have kind of suggested otherwise there. So
right.
I think that's about it. I think you probably have to hold guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Eckler as second rounders.
Josh Jacobs right now, his ADP is number 9. I don't have him in the first round. We're going to get to those wide receivers and Travis Kelce here in just a second. But first, we've got a ton of tools on our site. You guys know I'm Draft Wizard, my playbook. Did you guys know about our cheat sheet creator? You can check it out at fantasypros.com/draftwizard, and it is so easy to use. Basically, here's how it works, okay? You've got the convenience of just being able to import your rankings from anywhere on the web or even your own personal spreadsheet. It's really useful to just be able to combine multiple expert rankings into one consensus cheat sheet. So if you've got Pat Fitzmaurice and 4 other guys that you really trust because they're always super accurate in their rankings, you combine those 5 together and you've basically got your team of preferred fantasy analysts in your war room with you. It also gives you the ability to export your rankings to Excel or use them. You can import them into the Draft Simulator and Draft Assistant tools. Check out the cheat sheet creator at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. All right, Tags, we're going to start with you on the wide receivers. So Tyreek Hill, ADP number 8. He's not even your wide receiver 2, is he?
No, he's not. I don't know why people are reaching for Tyreek Hill. I understand why you want him. He could blow a week wide open. I get that, but he's also going to have a lot of weeks where he's kind of like, okay, this wasn't great. And especially if Mecole Hardman.
That does not happen with Davante Adams.
It doesn't happen with Davante Adams. It rarely happens with Julio Jones. It doesn't happen with Michael Thomas. So those are the guys that I would definitely take over Tyreek Hill. They're proven and they're consistent producers. That's what you want in the first round. Tyreek Hill to me is like the top of the second round pick. That's basically where I think he should go, just because of those inconsistencies. In the first round, I want a consistent player, and it's one of those reasons why I struggle grabbing someone like Derrick Henry, because you're relying on those big plays every single week for him to get it done or get those goal line carries. So. The only 4 wide receivers to me that should be even considered, actually. I mean, I guess you can consider Tyreek Hill at the end of the first round, but I don't want to take him there. But Michael Thomas, Davante Adams, and Julio Jones, those are the guys that belong in the first round. They're just proven producers year in, year out.
I agree with that. I'm a little bit worried about Adams' concussions, but when he's on the field, he is so dang consistent. I've got him as my number 3 wide receiver with Julio number 2, and I'm taking these guys 11 and 12. I've got them right after Aaron Jones and Kenyan Drake. Pat, where do you stand on the wide receivers?
So I've got Adams number 2, and we talked about the Packers, ill-conceived decisions on draft day, the 3 days of the draft, and the most glaring of which was their failure to come out with a wide receiver with one of the deepest, most talent-rich wide receiver classes we've seen in years. So the only free agent receiver they added was Devin Funchess, who's okay, but really more of a depth guy than a difference maker. So this is shaping up to be just an all-you-can-eat target buffet for Davante Adams this year. I mean, he had 127 targets in 12 games last year, so basically 10.5 targets a game, which works out to about 170 targets over a full season, and that's not all that far off from where Michael Thomas was last year. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Adams actually led the league in targets this year. And I'm certainly on board with him as a first rounder at number 10. Then I've got Hill third. I think Tags basically nailed it perfectly. You're going to get some week to week inconsistency with him. The splash weeks are great, but you want a guy who's consistently giving you, at least, 10, 11 points in half-point PPR every week, like at a floor. And you're going to have lower floor weeks than that with Tyreek. Hopkins is, I believe, I can't remember if I have Hopkins or Jones. I think I have Julio 4th and Hopkins 5th. To me, just like the first round ADP on Hopkins is kind of hard to justify. There's really no denying how good he is as a receiver, and I'm fairly excited about the Arizona offense, even with that offensive line being kind of shabby. But I still worry about the wide receivers who are changing teams this year. Just the team changers, these guys often experience a statistical drop-off even in normal years. But now, with the irregular off-season we're having because of the pandemic and the limited opportunities teams are going to have to work together in person, I mean, Hopkins just is not a first-rounder for me at all.
I agree with that. I'm really nervous about Hopkins. I'm not going to have any shares tags. I've got him number 18 on my big board overall, not for wide receivers. Don't panic, guys. Tags, how do you feel about Hopkins this year? Any chance he sneaks into your first round?
To me, no, he's not a first round pick, but if you want to take him in the second, I'm okay with that as long as you got your running back in the first. Because again, this is where like the first round conversation goes, is that you have to understand the reason running back's so heavy, because if you take someone like, let's say you take a Michael Thomas at 6 overall, those running backs are going to be gone. You're going to be looking at someone, maybe like, he was saying, like Todd Gurley, Austin Eckler. I don't want those guys as my RB1 if I can help it. So it all comes down to that. But DeAndre Hopkins, again, if you get a running back in the first, let's say that you get someone like, Derrick Henry in the first, and you want to take Hopkins in the second, I'm not opposed to that. Hopkins should offer some stability in that offense because, Christian Kirk, a guy that was in and out of the lineup last year, wasn't particularly efficient. We've seen DeAndre Hopkins perform with a lot of different quarterbacks. You know what I mean? The only year that he was outside basically the top 30 was with Brock Osweiler. But again, he worked with a lot of different quarterbacks throughout his career, so I don't think it's going to be as bad for him. He also, I want to say, started working out with Kyler Murray before this all took place. Like when he was traded to them, I think he was already started to work out with them before the quarantine took place. But either way, he's a second round pick to me. Tyreek Hill, I wanted to share a stat though. I pulled it up. So I do the boom bust and everything in between article every year. And it basically goes through and says, what was the average wide receiver 1 performance, the average wide receiver 2, yada, yada. And it goes through that. Tyreek Hill has posted wide receiver 2 or better numbers in just 21 of the last 43 games he's played over the last 3 years.
Yuck.
So you're talking about half the time he's not posting wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 numbers. And that's ultimately why, to me, I understand he's a wide receiver 1 because you do the projections and overall he's going to be up there, but he's not going to offer you the most consistency that you would want technically out of that wide receiver 1 spot.
So where are you guys drafting your number 2 wide receiver? I think you said it was Adams for you, Pat. Tags, you have, I don't remember if it was Adams
It's
or
Adams
Jones.
Number 2, yeah.
Over which running backs would you draft him, Tags?
I would debate, if I'm in a full PPR, I would debate Adams over like Derrick Henry.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's that tier that I would debate him over because I have Adams almost in that tier with Michael Thomas. I'm with Pat in the fact that I think it's very possible that he leads the league in targets as long as he stays on the field. We know that he's going to score double-digit touchdowns with Aaron Rodgers as his only threat really in the passing game. So there's little concern about Adams. That's why to me he's a first-round pick.
Sure.
Yeah, but again, you have to worry about if you take him at 7. You're hoping one of those running backs that you want falls back to you. So it might be safer to go with a running back.
Well, and plus you're taking Kenyan Drake over all of them, right? So Kenyan Drake's going to be there. You're not going to have any shares with these guys in the first round.
Pretty much. I mean, if I'm picking after the 7th or 8th pick, I know Drake's going to be there for me, and I'm going to take him because he has legitimately a top 3 ceiling in that offense with very, very little competition.
What about you, Pat? Where's your first? Where do you have Davante Adams ahead of which running backs?
Right now, I've got him 10th overall. So after the big 5 we talked about, and then I've got Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Miles Sanders.
Sure.
So 8 running backs total ahead of Davante. Then Davante is the second receiver, number 10 overall. And then right after Davante, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, and Kenyan Drake.
Now, Pat, Travis Kelce, some people are talking about taking him around the turn. Would you tell them don't do that, they're crazy, or could you see it?
Boy, and we're faced with this dilemma pretty much every year with Travis Kelce, aren't we? Mm-hmm. And to me, he's more of a mid-second rounder. That's where I start thinking about him. I just, the way I like to build my team is just to, fill the basket at running back and wide receiver. And I think especially this year when we're facing some of this uncertainty and we might have to add like COVID cases on top of the injuries. Like you're going to need all that running back and wide receiver depth this year. You can't be thinking like, I've got my top 3 wide receivers. I've got my top 2 running backs, my starters. I'm totally set. Like this year is going to test depth probably more than the normal year. And, we know what the normal year looks like with injuries and how things start to pile up. So I am a little against hitting the onesie positions early on this year. So I'm probably not going to be a tight end early guy unless it's tight end premium, in which case I might have to consider Kelce close to the turn,
Yeah.
or possibly even top 10. But, Kelce and Kittle are just going a little earlier than I would like. And I just don't feel real comfortable going that early for a tight end.
Tight end premium leagues are disgusting. Now, I agree. The tight end position is broken. It's just like DST, right? Well, not exactly like DST, but it's very unpredictable after the top 4 or 5. Even last year, O.J. Howard was going 4th or 5th, and he was absolutely awful. But I think the fix isn't that you add a point per reception or half a point per reception to tight ends. I think you just make tight ends another wide receiver, and you have 4 starting wide receivers on your team.
I'm not opposed to it, but I think it does take away some of the strategy that you have to deploy in order to get one of those guys. And I mean, I'm in those positions. I'm never like an early tight end guy, but I'm also at the point where now let's pretend that you take someone like a Derrick Henry or Dalvin Cook in the 5 or 6 spot, right? And then you get around to the second, and the other running backs are gone. The wide receiver that you're looking at there is like Kenny Galladay, Amari Cooper. You don't love those guys. And then you say, do I take an elite player at their position? Because you know that Kelce and Kittle, as long as they're healthy, they're going to be 1 and 2. That's just happening. So
right.
That's the tough part to me, is that at that point, I think I do consider them right there in the middle of the second round. I wouldn't take them over some of the running backs that we've talked about already. And obviously Kelce and Kittle are both going before Kenyan Drake, and that's just madness to me. Because again, Drake is a 3-down running back playing in an offense that people are projecting to take a step forward. From when he joined that offense last year, he was the number 3 running back in the league. And then, you removed David Johnson and the couple touches per game that he was getting. Their defense gets a little bit better with the additions they made. They added to the offensive line. Kyler Murray's second year, Cliff Kingsbury's second year. We know he wanted to run more plays. Maybe he gets the opportunity to do that this year. And even last year, I went through and added up. If you were to take the starting performances from David Johnson, the 2 weeks where Chase Edmonds started, and then the rest, the other 8 weeks from when Kenyan Drake started, and you put them all into one running back, not the whole team, just the starting running back from each week of the season, and they finished as the number 3 running back, one point behind Aaron Jones.
Wow.
So, and that's what I'm saying. So I think people forgot just how good David Johnson was at the start of the year last year in fantasy. I think he was the number 5 or number 6 running back before he got hurt, and then Chase Edmonds obviously had some big games in there, and then Drake came in and just demolished it. So yeah, I like Kenyan Drake an awful lot. And if there's anything I want you guys to take away from this podcast, is that if you have a late first-round pick and you can get Kenyan Drake there, I think you should consider yourself lucky.
Yep, I agree with that. Absolutely. In fact, you can probably get him in the second round. Guys, let's move on over, though. We're going to be talking about 10 late-round must-haves. Each of you guys have 5. We're going to count them down. And Tags, I want you to go first, okay? Mm-hmm. I want you to give 2 of them, your number 5 and your number 4, and we'll move along a little bit quicker in this than we did in the first round deep dive. We're going to go a little bit slower than when we get to your number 1. So Tags, give us your number 5 and your number 4.
All right, so I went outside the top 150 players because deep dives can mean a lot of different things. Like if you talk about Dynasty, you're talking about further down. But in redraft leagues, I feel like outside the top 150, these are the guys that are available in the later rounds. So my top 2 that in terms of ADP, these guys are going at 158 and 159 overall. Jalen Reagor of the Philadelphia Eagles, his ADP is going to go up. His ADP is
coming up, though.
I want to be clear about this. He's going to go up. But right now I had to exploit the weakness in the system because Alshon Jeffrey, from what we're hearing, he's going to start the year on PUP. And if he starts the year on the PUP list, Jalen Reagor is going to play against Washington in week 1. Well, it's Washington. And then he's also going to play against Cincinnati, the Bengals, in week 3. So there's matchups here. He's a guy that could be lined up all over the field. They're talking about the beat reporters saying that he's probably going to lead this team in targets at the wide receiver position. So getting that guy in the late rounds, he's electric. I loved him in the scouting process. I thought his 40 time was a bit over, like people overreacted to it. He's a fast player on the field. And then Jack Doyle. He gets Jacksonville in week 1, a team that defense is just horrendous. There's no other way to put it. And Jack Doyle, again, playing with Phillip Rivers is going to make a difference. That team is going to score more points moving forward. Trey Burton is not a guy who's going to walk in on week 1 and just all of a sudden, just dive back into fantasy relevance, we saw Eric Ebron being phased out of that offense. So unless you think it's Mo Alley Cox or something like that, I don't know why people are fading Jack Doyle as much as they are in a Frank Reich system that uses the tight end a lot, and then having a quarterback like Phillip Rivers come in who's always supported top-tier tight ends. So Reagor and Doyle are my 5 and 4.
All right, Pat, why don't you give us your 5 and 4, unless you have a comment on either Reagor or Doyle.
No, I like those calls. And since my buddy Tags started with a rookie receiver and a tight end, I'm just going to mirror him here. And I'll go even a wide receiver who's going a little later than Reagor is Laviska Shenault. Probably my second biggest. Yeah, like after Jonathan Taylor, who, I mean, when Tags talked about Taylor being like a discount Nick Chubb, he was whistling my tune there. I completely agree. So Shenault is this 6'1", 227-pound beast, and while he's not all that fast for a wideout, he is so powerful after the catch, and he's a little bit shifty too. I mean, he kind of reminds me a little of a young Anquan Bolden, and he didn't put up very good numbers in his final year at Colorado due to the limitations of that offense, and the pre-draft process didn't go all that well for him due to a core injury that required surgery.
Are you worried about that injury? Because that's why I'm not drafting him in a redraft league. I don't know how soon he's going to get on the field, if he'll be ready right away, if he'll be 100%.
So I think they do expect him to be ready, after the surgical repair. So, and the Jaguars liked him enough to take him early in the second round, 42nd overall. Now I know that, there's reason to be concerned about rookie receivers in this year of COVID-19. So I do have to be a little hesitant here and not overdraft him. But, I do like Shenault more as a prospect than guys like Denzel Mims, Michael Pittman, Brandon Ayuk. And this guy could be such a useful kind of Swiss Army knife for the Jaguars. I mean, he had 5 rushing TDs for Colorado as a sophomore.
Rushing TDs. So This is a guy that could line up all over the place, and his ADP right now is wide receiver 81. His ECR is wide receiver 78, so he is just dirt cheap. And, by the way, they have really good matchups to start their season. The Jaguars, until their bye week in week 7, they play 6 pretty easy defenses.
Yeah, so I do think there's going to be opportunity for him to see the field right away as a rookie. And now, Bobby, with the tight end pick, I do not want to upset you here because I know you're a big Tyler Higbee guy. And actually, I am too.
No. Are you going Gerald Everett?
I am going Gerald Everett.
I mean, there's a chance. Yeah, sure.
Well, so the genie is basically out of the bottle with Higbee, right? I mean, there's no way he goes back to just 3 or 4 targets a game, which was where he was basically for the entire first half of last year. And then he goes absolutely bonkers in December, averaging better than 100 yards a game over the Rams' last 5 games. I mean, that genie wasn't just out of the bottle. He was drinking champagne, dancing with the ladies. There's no way this guy is getting stuff back into the bottle, okay?
It was like prime Gronk, man. It was unbelievable what he was doing.
Oh, man. But let's not forget that Everett was actually being used more in the passing game than Higbee before Everett hyperextended his knee and opened the door for Higbee to break out. And now that the Rams are going to be using more 12 personnel and getting Higbee and Everett on the field together, I mean, it's possible that Higbee can still be a top 10 tight end and Everett can be maybe a high-end tight end 2, maybe even flirting with low-end tight end 1 value. And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Everett the first pick the Rams made in the Sean McVay era? They didn't have a first-rounder in 2017.
Yeah, that was a second-round pick, right?
Yeah. So I think they want both of these guys to be involved in the offense, and Everett just looks like a bargain to me at an ADP of what? Tight end 33.
That's interesting. Like. What's also interesting is that nobody mentioned the right tight end, which is O.J. Howard. I think O.J. Howard could still have a very good year, even if Gronk stays healthy, because they're going to run so much 12 personnel there as well. And O.J. Howard's one of the most efficient tight ends in NFL history. I'm going to have some shares of O.J. Howard in best ball, and I won't apologize for it. I'm excited about him.
Yep. I have no issue with that. I really don't, because Gronk, I talked about it on the last show, that Gronk might not be the same player. He's come back off a year. If they're going to run two tight end sets, that means Chris Godwin's going to be on the perimeter. And I want you guys to close your eyes for a second and do like an exercise with me. Tom Brady drops back to pass. What do you see him doing? Like, does the ball that he throws, does it go to the perimeter? Does it go over the middle of the field? What's the pass you see him throwing?
A slant.
A slant?
Right, middle of the field. It's Brady.
Correct.
Yeah.
He doesn't have like a crazy strong
Miller.
arm at this point in his career where he could just whip it out to the sidelines like Patrick Mahomes running off to the side. He's a guy that throws the ball into the ground if he feels any bit of pressure. So if they're going to run more 2 tight end sets, that means Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are going to be the perimeter wide receivers, and you're going to have Gronk, the running backs. You're going to have, and then O.J. Howard is the number 2 tight end running, over that middle of the field. So I think it's very possible that O.J. Howard is being a little undervalued. Now, again, he's not someone I don't know if you need to draft, but if you grab him with like your last pick and you say, we'll see what happens week 1, because it's very possible that Rob Gronkowski is going to basically be a mentor to O.J. Howard. And by the way, O.J. Howard has been at the workouts that Tom Brady put together this offseason.
Awesome. Tags, give us your number 3 and number 2 package together here.
Number 3 and number 2, this one's hard. All right, number 3, I'm going to go with Jalen Hurd of the 49ers. He's basically not being drafted. And this comes down to Deebo Samuel I don't anticipate him being ready for the start of the season. And if he's not ready for the start of the season, they need someone who could do a lot of those things, right? And he was getting a lot of carries. Like he had multiple touchdowns on the ground. He was getting multiple carries a game. Jalen Hurd is a former running back that converted to wide receiver. Had like 1,000 yards in his first season as a receiver too. So he's just an absurd athlete. A guy that they believed in enough to draft in the 3rd round, going back to last year's draft. So Jalen Hurd, he missed last year, but don't forget about him, because if, in fact, Deebo Samuel is out for those first couple weeks, they're playing Arizona in week 1, the Jets in week 2, the Giants in week 3. So those are 3 teams that you could definitely move the ball against, and it's clear that Dante Pettis ain't that guy for Kyle Shanahan. He doesn't like him very much. They do have Brandon Ayuk, but he's a rookie, a guy that, again, I don't know if he's a target monster. I don't think he is. They traded away Marquise Goodwin. So you look at all the pieces, and you're like, okay, Jalen Hurd should have an opportunity to kind of play that role until Deebo Samuel comes back. So he's a sleeper. And then number 4.
So, Tags, what you're saying is Jalen Hurd and Jalen Reagor are locks in your week 1 DFS lineup.
I mean, I don't know if I'm going to say locks. I mean,
I like them, man. I like them in those matchups.
They could be tournament plays if you have Deebo out and if you have Alshon Jeffrey out for sure.
Right. I can't wait for DFS, man. I'm so excited for DFS to return.
For sure. And my number 2 is Damien Harris. He's going at 220 overall, so basically undrafted. Sony Michel had another surgery this offseason. He hasn't looked like the same player. He's been inefficient. Tom Brady's gone. There's a lot of reasons I don't like Sony Michel this year. And basically, there's going to be production on the ground for the Patriots. They always do. So I'm going to go with Damien Harris, the guy that they drafted in the 3rd round last year. He didn't play many snaps, and people are like, Mike, he only had a couple carries last year. I get it. But the reason he didn't get those, because he was inactive. And the reason he was inactive is because he contributes nothing on special teams. So if Damien Harris is active, that he has a chance to make an impact in the game. And honestly, from what I've seen in the NFL from Sony Michel so far, Damien Harris is going to be a better running back.
Man, you just nailed 2 of the guys that I would have personally picked as well. Pat, what do you think about these 2, Jalen Hurd and Damien Harris?
I wrote an article about late round best ball values like 2 weeks ago, and Hurd and Damien Harris were both on my list.
Yeah,
Tags just nailed it here, man. And I'm really excited about Hurd. And, I hate to see the door open for him with the Deebo injury. But, Tags mentioned like the running back usage in college. Like he's another guy who I talked about Shenault being a potential Swiss Army knife. Hurd definitely is in that same category.
All right, it's over to you, Pat, for your number 2 and number 3. And guys, I'm getting nervous because neither of you have mentioned the best late round must-have guy yet. So you guys better pick it up.
All right, one guy for me is Darrington Evans. And
sure, I love that call. Yeah.
I've been getting him in the late rounds of almost every best ball draft I do because he's always there. FantasyPros has his ADP at running back 62 and his ECR at running back 59. And I kind of think that's his floor because he really has no competition to be the Titans' number 2 running back. I mean, they spent a 3rd round pick on him. Yep. And granted, Henry is their early down guy, of course, and is going to be the bell cow. But, we're going to see Evans play on passing downs. So he's got a little bit of a floor there with the passing game usage. And if that massive workload does start to take its toll on Henry and he starts to break down, the value of Evans just goes through the roof if he steps into an expanded role. So you're getting a decent floor here and some lottery ticket potential.
What is his upside? If Derrick Henry goes down, where would you rank him rest of the season? If Henry's out for the rest of the year?
I mean, he's a guy who's going to people are going to be emptying the fab budget on him big
100%, yeah.
And, you would think single week running back one upside with, running back two type of floor.
I agree with that.
I mean, yeah, who else is there, man? He would get used a lot. And I know he's not the biggest guy, but he's not tiny either. He's not just completely diminutive. So, I think he could carry 15 times a week, catch 5 passes a week if Henry was out. So, that's RB1 upside for sure. And
right.
My other guy is Steven Sims Jr. So he got a chance to be Washington's slot man last year after they sort of realized that Trey Quinn wasn't much of a player. And over the final 4 games, Sims had 20 catches on 36 targets, 230 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And he was an undrafted free agent out of Kansas. And whereas, I like big, fast receivers, he is kind of small and slow, 5'9", 184 pounds with 4.6 speed. But I'm sure you guys have probably watched the tape on him. And he is a crafty little route runner, man. He's got a bag of tricks and seems to have this knack for throwing these feints at cornerbacks that just sort of put them on their heels for a minute. Mm-hmm. And obviously, there are a lot of targets available in Washington. Terry McLaurin is the alpha receiver. And then
I love Kelvin Harmon, so I can't get on board with this one. But yeah, he looks like a quality player.
Yeah, I mean, Harmon's going to contribute
slot,
for
though.
sure.
Yeah, I think Harmon
kind of a yet-to-be-determined guy. And,
sure.
I don't know about Antonio Gandy-Golden because I don't know if he's going to be able to beat press coverage in the NFL. So it might take at least a year or two for him to sort of learn the ropes and start contributing. And it doesn't appear Washington has any significant pass catchers at tight end. So I think we could see Sims clear 100 targets pretty easily this year.
All right, Tags, what do you think about those two?
I'm a little lost in the Redskins thing right now because basically if you go and if you're on Twitter every day, you could see everybody talking up Antonio Gibson. Like they're like, oh, I love Antonio Gibson and I love Terry McLaurin. And then we get to Steven Sims and it's like, I think I'm pretty positive if we were to do a poll that the Redskins would be considered a bottom 5 offense in the NFL. So therefore, the upside that you're going to get out of these players is not going to be generally as high as you'd want it to. Now, Steven Sims showed up at the end of the year, but this team has like 20 running backs. Antonio Gibson is going to be treated as a running back / receiver of some sort. I don't know. I think that Sims might turn out to be the best value. I don't know what his upside, though, is, where it's like the later rounds. I think that I'm going to shoot for guys that could potentially finish his top 24 options. And I love Terry McLaurin, the player. I don't know if this offense has enough scoring to support him as anything better than like the wide receiver 18 or something like that. And it has nothing to do with his talent. It comes down to touchdowns. Think like Cortland Sutton last year, right? Played out of his mind, played really, really well, but only scored 6 touchdowns because the offense just didn't generate a lot of points. So that's my only concern with this offense. I don't have a problem with Steven Sims, the player, and he would be a third wide receiver. He's not going to take Kelvin Harmon or Gandy Golden spot because I think Harmon and Gandy Golden, those guys are competing with each other for the perimeter job opposite McLaurin, where Steven Sims would play in the slot. So there's just a lot of unknowns with this team right now, but I generally don't want to tie myself to teams that are lower scoring is all.
My guy was Antonio Gibson, by the way, before you dragged him through the mud, Tags. I'm all in on Antonio Gibson, man. So what? Okay, if he doesn't start, you cut him. I think that this is the supposed backup running back who has the best chance to start, him and Justin Jackson. And I know everyone loves Austin Eckler. Eckler's going to be great regardless of what his role is. I just think Justin Jackson might take that Melvin Gordon role. I've talked about that. Pat, what do you think about Antonio Gibson?
Well, I think I'm on board, Bobby, because didn't I take him in the FantasyPros Dynasty League rookie draft?
You did, and I was furious at you. I was trying to trade up for that pick.
So, yeah, he is an interesting lottery pick, man. That guy is just so exciting on tape.
He could handle a ton of touches. This is an elite, electric athlete who can catch the ball, too.
Yeah, so I'm like walking the tightrope between your view here and Tag's view. Like I'm excited about the talent, but I, like Tags, have serious, questions about how he fits into this offense. Like It is a confusing offense to piece together for sure. I definitely feel pretty good about McLaurin and Sims just because I think the targets are going to be there for these guys for sure, and probably Harmon too. I don't know how this running back situation is going to sort itself out.
I agree with you guys. I'm not confident that Gibson's going to start. I'm just saying I'm taking this dart throw. I think he's got some upside.
Yeah, he is a fun lottery ticket for sure, and I don't know if it's going to pay off this year, but
Sure.
given a window of 2 or 3 years, I think he is going to pop eventually.
Well, if he doesn't pay off this year, I will buy him low from you in the Dynasty League. How's that sound?
That's a deal.
All right, Tags, who is your number one, buddy?
All right, when you're looking for potential breakout stars, you obviously want to tie to a high-scoring offense, a depth chart that they don't have very much to climb. So when you're getting to late rounds, you're not going to find a running back that's at the top of the depth chart. It's just not going to happen. But one guy he can play all 3 downs, and he showed it down the stretch last year, is Boston Scott. Boston Scott is a guy that Doug Peterson obviously believes in as the number 2 back, and I think that's part of the reason they haven't brought in another running back to play alongside Miles Sanders. And it's very possible that Doug Peterson does not stop with the timeshare usage, and he says, you know what, Boston Scott's really good too. Miles Sanders, you're going to get, let's call it 40 snaps per game, and we're going to give Boston Scott 25 snaps per game. That could be Chris Thompson type production, and that could be fine in a flex spot or whatever you need it for. But if anything were to happen to Miles Sanders and miss some time, Boston Scott showed again down the stretch last year that he's able to step into that role and contribute in fantasy football as an RB1, RB2 type player. So I think getting him in the later rounds, he's one of those guys, and we talk about, stacking those guys in your bench, high upside guys. I think he's one of them. And I also happen to think that he's going to produce some flex numbers for you, even through bye weeks that you could probably stick in your lineup. So Boston Scott, yeah.
Tags, you were on fire, man. And then you just totally pooped in the bed, in my opinion. Boston Scott? What's his upside, man?
I mean, he showed you down the stretch last year. He
piled in 3 touchdowns. You know who else can do that? Gus Edwards.
Oh, stop it. Gus Edwards is number 4 on the depth chart. But looking at it, 19 carries, 54 yards, 3 touchdowns. He caught this is where I like it. He had 6 targets, 7 targets, 6 targets, 6 targets.
That's true.
So it's more about his ability to work through 3 down work. I'm not saying that he's
okay.
not, I mean, what is he? 5'6", 203 pounds. He's not a guy that is going to handle 20 carries per game, but I'm saying if in a pinch they needed him to get 12 to 15 carries, get 6, 7 targets, I'll take that all day long.
I mean, I guess. I just really want these guys with if I'm going for a backup running back, I want a league-winning upside guy like Darrington Evans,
I'm not saying I don't like Darrington Evans. I do. I don't think that offense is going to be as potent as the Eagles, though.
I do.
That's true.
When Tannehill took over, they had the best offense in all of
football. Well, they also lost their starting right tackle.
Okay, that's fair.
They
also drafted a very good starting right tackle.
Isaiah Wilson, he could be good. I think that there's a range of outcomes with him.
He is a mauler, man. He is so NFL ready. He's polished.
But he wouldn't have fallen to them if he was a guaranteed stud.
Well, he doesn't have a ton of upside.
No, he definitely, he's a long player. He has upside for sure. But what I'm saying is Conklin's he was a top 5 run blocking tackle in the league. You can't just assume that Isaiah Wilson's going to come in and do the same thing.
That's fair. Don't forget the Eagles just lost a offensive lineman.
Brandon Brooks, yeah.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
Sucks.
All right, we're talking about right tackles on the Tennessee Titans, so let's move on to Pat for his number 1.
So mine is Breshad Perriman, and we saw him just completely ball out down the stretch last season. Over his last 5 games, he had 25 catches for 506 yards and 5 TDs. Now, of course, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were hurt for some of those games, but not all of those games. It was only the last 2 of those games that both Evans and Godwin were hurt, I believe. So Perriman certainly seized on the opportunity, and he was pretty good when he got a chance down the stretch in 2018, too, with the Browns. Over the final 5 games of that season, he had 10 catches for 259 yards. That's a pretty darn impressive 25.9 yards per catch. So, I mean, we should probably start calling this guy Santa Claus because he has been so good in December the last 2 years. And now he gets a chance to be the lead guy for the Jets. And,
right.
When we were talking about DeAndre Hopkins, I mentioned my concern about team changers. So, I do kind of need to be consistent with that. And that might be kind of an issue with Perriman, but I do think it's fair to wonder whether Denzel Mims is going to be able to push for a heavy-duty role right away with the Jets, and Jamison Crowder is really just a short area slot receiver. So I do think Perriman is going to be the primary downfield receiver for Sam Darnold. And guys, let's not forget we are talking about a 6'2 wide receiver who once ran a 4'3. I don't know if he has quite the same wheels anymore, but this is a big, fast dude. Yep. And he is finally starting to make an impact now that he's past the injuries that, just completely dogged him with the Ravens early in his career.
I love him as a dart throw because I think there's a chance he's the number 1 wide receiver on the Jets. And It wasn't just, the production because he got targets. You watched his tape in week 14, 15, 16. He looked like a very quality, real wide receiver in the NFL. Now, here's my problem with Perriman. Week 1, Buffalo. Who's Tre'Davious White going to shadow? It's not Jamison Crowder. It's not the rookie Denzel Mims. It's Breshad Perriman. Week 2, San Francisco. Week 4, they get Denver. It doesn't look pretty at the start of the season. That schedule is very tough.
Yeah, I wrote an article on the new strength of schedule. I go through wide receivers and I don't go on last year's numbers. I actually went through the cornerbacks on each team's depth chart and I graded them. And then I said, all right, now how does this match up with the strength of schedule? Because we can anticipate cornerback matchups.
Where's this article? What's it called? I need to bookmark it.
It's called The New Strength of Schedule for Wide Receivers. Okay. It's on FantasyPros.com, obviously. But the Jets have the worst schedule in the league, and Bobby was hitting on the head. So my advice was that if you want one of these Jets receivers, wait until after week 10 to acquire them, because over the first 9 weeks they play the Bills twice, 49ers, Chargers, and Patriots. It's a brutal matchup, and not just that. They play for Adam Gase, which is never a good thing. It's a 1-year deal.
New Tags was going to bring up the Adam Gase thing.
You got to. I mean, when you run 56, 58 plays per game, you have to do that. Sam Darnold hasn't proven the ability to support a perimeter wide receiver. If anything, it's been the slot. I'm sad to say, I actually have nothing against Darnold. I think he's going to be a fine quarterback if they realize that Adam Gase is terrible and move on. But I don't trust him to support a fantasy receiver right now in that offense, combined with that brutal schedule and combined with the fact that Perriman is on his 4th team in 4 years. I mean, I just don't think teams move on from players like that if they're studs. And honestly, the Jets gave him a 1-year deal, so they didn't really believe in him. It was more of like, all right, we need some guys in the depth chart to fill a spot. Denzel Mims can be a good football player, but again, he is a rookie. You don't want to rely too much on them. So, yeah, unfortunately, again, I hate tying myself to bad offenses is all.
Tags, I just saw that you've got Mike Williams as the wide receiver with the greatest schedule. That makes me so happy, man.
And I still don't want him. He really does. 11 of his 15 games are against opponents that I deemed below average cornerbacks, which is really good. But his quarterbacks I would also deem as below average. So.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Tyrod Taylor in those first 10 weeks has incredible matchups, dude. Incredible matchups.
Hold on, real quick, Pat. Do you think that Tyrod Taylor is going to actually be starting more than a couple weeks?
No. No, I think they'll throw Herbert in there pretty quickly.
I think if Tyrod Taylor dominates against Cincinnati, Carolina, Tampa Bay, the Jets, the Dolphins, the Jags, the Raiders, he's going to keep starting, baby. I'm so pumped about Tyrod Taylor. I'm drafting him. He's my quarterback that I'm drafting. There's no doubt about it. I'm waiting until the very last round, and everyone's going to be like, dude, you went Tyrod Taylor at your quarterback? Yeah, he's going to freaking win me the league. Let's go. All right, guys, that's all for today's show. Pat, really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, Bobby and Tags, thanks for having me. Always great to talk to you guys.
Yeah, guys, give Pat a follow on Twitter at Fitz_FF. Don't forget to check out our giveaways. We're giving away a signed DeAndre Hopkins Cardinals helmet. That giveaway ends July 15th, so make sure to get your entry in. You can check out the details at fantasypros.com/contest. And you can leave us a review of your, take a screenshot of your review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Send us that screenshot at contest@fantasypros.com. And oh, by the way, we're also giving away a Fielder's Choice wallet made of vintage baseball glove leather. 2 separate giveaways, same way to enter though. Details at contest@fantasypros.com. And don't forget to check out our cheat sheet creator. You can find it at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. It is super easy to use, extremely convenient, and just really useful. You can basically have your favorite team of experts in your war room with you. Export these rankings into Excel, import your rankings into Draft Simulator and Draft Assistant. For Pat Fitzmaurice and Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your football. Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos, and while you're at it, give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook so that you can get the latest news and updates that'll give you the edge in your fantasy league.